We can do so many things. All these things we've got to allow us to do so many different things. Being a human being. I don't know what it is, but you fall in love with something. I feel I'm losing things physically, but that's going to happen. You can't help that, the aging of the body, finally, with everybody. But if you love what you're doing, you're a lucky person. That's why I say it. And nothing special about me, but good luck. My father was a doctor. He was actually the first pathologist in the city of Washington. He had gone abroad and studied. His father was a doctor before him. His father came out of the Civil War and went to medical school, which was 1 year at that time, and became a doctor. And so when my father appeared on the scene as part of his family, the question came up rather interestingly. He loved to play the piano. Should I be a doctor or a pianist? Well, he opted finally to become a doctor who always played the piano. Offices, laboratory, waiting room, dressing room, that was on the first floor of our house. And then the second floor, you went up a staircase, a short one, and there was a landing, and then a long staircase that went up to living room, dining room, and so on, up the rest of the house. And out here is my clock. That stood on the landing in my house in Washington. Who knows, it may even strike while we're here. It does. And I was actually born in the house. In those days, they did that sometimes. And I have an older sister, 4.5 years older, still in D.C. We had the early Victrola that you wound up. My great-uncle was the inventor of the Victor talking machine. And so we had recorded music earlier than most people. Very early recordings. I can't remember not having records in the house. So I was used to hearing very beautiful real music as well as extensive recordings from the beginning. Aside from my father's very nice piano playing, that's his piano.
That's your father's piano?
I grew up with it. And from the time, interestingly enough, age 3, I asked for the violin. Well, people didn't do that in those days, give violin to children age 3. It must have been the sound, because I don't even know whether I'd even seen one before I started asking for the sound on the recordings. I just must have liked the sound I heard on recordings. That's all I can say. There was a violin teacher who lived on the block, who had studied in Europe, in Germany, with a lot of the big people. And he was considered one of the best violin teachers in the city. A man named Herman Rockeman, spelled R-A-K-E, strangely enough. And so I used to go down, I was told, when I was very little, and ask for violin lessons. Didn't get them till I was 10. And that I felt to me was a disadvantage. I felt I would have had much better equipment and been more natural with it if I'd been started when I kept asking for it at 3 and nobody would pay any attention to me. The earlier, the better. And when Suzuki came along, that's what really hit me. He knew it.
Wow.
He knew it. That's what, was the whole difference between, quote, the Suzuki approach and traditional teaching. Most traditional teachers wouldn't start to until you at least starting school, 6 years old. 7 years old or something. That was even considered early. That's my clock. You like it?
Very much. Nice tone.
You know what it is? It's a Big Ben. That's a Big Ben strike.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you know Big Ben.
Mm-hmm, of course.
In London. This man who lived down the street and who did become my first teacher claims I used to come down when I was a real little kid and sit under the window and listen to the lessons. And I do remember when I did start studying with him, a wonderful story. He had a big Airedale dog. And the Airedale dog would come in and lie under the piano. His studio was on the second story of the house. Would lie under the piano and listen to the lessons. And if the lesson was going well, he'd stay there, happily listening to the lessons. If you weren't playing very well, he'd get up, turn and look at you balefully, and walk out. So you always knew if you were having a good lesson or not. It's one of my favorite stories. Actually, Mr. Rockerman, my teacher, was one of the people who also started the National Symphony. There was no orchestra in Washington in the early days. And so he was instrumental in getting that started, because he played viola in the orchestra there. My parents sent my sister and me to private school, to the Marais French School. So we went to French school, where we learned everything in French. We had one class in English a day. And so we got very facile in French, obviously. And since there was some Germans being spoken at home, we had 3 languages, which was very good. I have to admit, English is my best. First of all, it was a very good school. These people came from Geneva. They were les Mesdemoiselles Marais. They came from Geneva, and where supposedly they speak the purest French, which is interesting. My parents just believed in our knowing languages. That was the reason, and it was a very fine school. And the school started having the advantage of Dalcroze Eurythmics, which is a wonderful beginning music training, actually, because what is the most important thing of all is rhythmics. Rhythm is the focus of music, basically. I mean, it's even more important than melody and anything else. And getting early Dalcroze was very good. And the school brought Dalcroze, actually, himself. I once met him. They brought him, it was early in Dalcroze, and they were Swiss. And of course, he was from Geneva. And he came with one of his teachers. And I actually met him. Amazing. But this was a very good idea. Instead of gym, we did Eurythmics. Well, we did some outside gym, too. This was a small private school. It's still in Washington, in Marais. It was a great school. And they even had high school, and I had my first year of high school there as well. And then my mother, who had been a teacher in the Washington district schools, had been a teacher in the public schools, felt that we were too protected. She did this to my sister, she did it to me. She sent us to public high school. See how the other world lives. Well, public high school, as far as I was concerned, was awful. It was one of these huge schools, you know, with 40 kids to a class, that kind of thing. Oh, really? 30, 40 kids, big classes. Very different from our protected little French school where you had maybe 10 or 15 to the class. But it had one advantage. It had a school orchestra, and quite a good one. And it was conducted by a Britishman named Mr. Wood. Very British. And Mr. Woods even set up some chamber music for us. And that was my first good experience in chamber music.